San Diegans accomplish great things every day. We care about our neighbors and our community. We are proud of our diversity. We are resilient. We hold our leaders accountable. We live in one of the most dynamic cities in America, the San Diego Union-Tribune, telling San Diego's story for more than 150 years.
Hello, I'm Dr. Gail F. Baker, Vice President and Provost at the University of San Diego.
And I'm Dr. Noelle Norton, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here at USD.
For the second year in a row, USD, along with its College of Arts and Sciences and Humanities Center, is proud to return as the presenting sponsor for the 2021 San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books.
As a university deeply committed to the liberal arts, USD promotes a form of lifelong learning that ignites curiosity, builds critical connections across different ideas and topics by seeing them from unique perspectives.
Our partnership with the Festival of Books enables all of us avid readers to come together as a community alongside renowned authors from all over the world and to dive deeply into imaginative stories and important themes.
Yes, books do have the ability to open minds and hearts. On behalf of the University of San Diego, we thank you for joining us for today's program to explore the world of books with us.
Enjoy the presentation.
SDCCU is an engaged community partner. Each year, SDCCU is proud to support many nonprofit organizations throughout Southern California. Our partnerships allow us to help shape the financial lives of many through volunteerism, financial support, and creating public awareness. The result is a big impact on the communities we serve. SDCCU, it's not big bank banking, it's better. Federally insured by NCUA. Find out more at sdccu.com.
Welcome to the San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books. I'm Dean Nelson, the director of the journalism program at Point Loma Nazarene University and the host of the annual Writers Symposium by the Sea. And what a privilege to get to talk to Jonathan Safran Foer today about his more recent book, We Are the Weather. This is such an interesting and amazing and important book. And I've just got to tell you, Jonathan, I've been a fan for a long time, read your fiction, your nonfiction. You're one of the few who I think can do both. And so I'm thrilled to be just kind of sharing some space with you at this festival today. So welcome.
Thank you. It's funny how our notion of sharing space has changed, right?
Yeah, we're sharing screen space.
Yeah, but one of the, it was such a tragic year, but it obviously encouraged some personal reorientation, at least among most people I know. And one of the things that it changed in me for the positive was giving me a lot more gratitude for sharing space with people.
Right.
So I really, it's not an empty idiom when I say I really am so glad to be here talking to you.
Well, it's an honor for me personally, and it's an honor for the festival to have you with us. This book, one of the reasons why I think this book is so important is that you kind of own your own contradictions. Occasionally, you call it personal hypocrisy. I don't call it that. It's like you acknowledge your contradictions of where you described, I think someone described you once as an occasional vegetarian, which I think sort of illustrates the point that eating meat is part of a problem that we've created in the world. Not eating meat would actually go a long ways to helping with climate change, with pollution, with all sorts of other things. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it just seems like this is a book about our relationship, not necessarily with animals like your Eating Animals book was. This is a book about our relationship with our future. Would you agree?
I would agree. I think it's also about our relationship with ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
I have been an inconsistent eater over the years, which you could say is a reflection of like an expression of a failure, or maybe it's an expression of a success. That
expression of humanity.
Expression of, yeah. This has been a problem which has taken a lot of different shapes in my life over the years. And I've put the emphasis on different places, but it's never gone away. So when I was 9, I became a vegetarian because I had a babysitter who was a vegetarian who made what I thought was an absolutely persuasive argument for vegetarianism. And I frankly still do, which is I don't want to hurt anything unnecessarily. It's an easy idea to kind of laugh at or dismiss, but it's a really hard idea to argue against. And yet, over the years, I have found ways to, if not argue against it, then just forget about it.
Ignore it.
Yeah. And as I've grown older and as I've learned more about how the world works, and as how we as humans know more about how the world works, the arguments for, at the very least, eating less meat have become more clear, more broad, whether looking at it from the perspective of animal cruelty, which I think is, the desire to protect animals from cruelty, I think is one of the most universally shared values that humans have. 96% of Americans think animals deserve some protection, legal protection from cruelty. If you can find anything else that 96% of Americans agree on, I'd love to hear about it. The environmental argument is utterly persuasive, whether talking about climate change or air pollution or water pollution, deforestation, loss of biodiversity. None of this is controversial and none of it is ambiguous, but that doesn't mean it will inspire us to change, both because change is hard, especially when you're changing something that you enjoy and have a long history of doing and have very positive memories of. But also, change usually involves story rather than information. And we haven't gotten the story right, whether the story about eating animals or the story about climate change.
Right.
We haven't told it in a way that inspires us not only to know, but to act.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I thought came through so well in this book is more information is not necessarily the key. If all we needed was more facts, then we wouldn't be having, at least in my opinion, we wouldn't still be having debates about vaccines and masks and smoking or seatbelts or whatever. More information has not been the thing that has changed people's behavior. As you're saying, it's a combination of things. Actually, it's governments and industries, but it's also story. And you do a really, really interesting thing toward the beginning of this book in this example you give with Supreme Court Justice Frankfurter and is it Jan Karski or Jan Karski? It's Jan. Yeah. And so can you give us that example of where how the Supreme Court Justice responds to this information that he's just been given?
Sure. Jan Karski was a Catholic Pole in the underground who, to make a very long story short, smuggled himself into the Warsaw Ghetto and smuggled himself into a death camp in order to put together testimonies and evidence to bring to the West to try to persuade British and American leaders to act on what was happening in Europe. He made his way to the United States, and one of his first meetings was with Felix Frankfurter, the Supreme Court Justice, who's widely considered one of the smartest people America's ever produced, and was himself Jewish. And Karski, laid out the case, shared the testimony, shared the evidence, shared what documents he had. And Frankfurter peppered him with questions and then thought for a few minutes and said, I have to be frank with you. I can't believe what you're telling me. And Karski said, why would you doubt it? What incentive would I have to lie about this? And Frankfurter said, well, I didn't say that you were lying. I said that I'm incapable of believing it. My heart and my mind were made in such a way that I can't believe it. And I became really interested when writing this book in the difference between what we know and what we believe. Knowledge being something that's really contained in our heads, belief being something that probably resides closer to our hearts, and how it is that we can move information from our heads to our hearts, and what happens if we just can't. What happens if our minds and our hearts were not built in such a way that we can comprehend climate change, which may very well be the case, but it doesn't make us hopeless. We can create frameworks for behavior so that we don't have to rely on our own belief every time we're buying an automobile or choosing whether to take a flight abroad or looking at a menu and deciding what to eat.
Yeah, and it just seemed like what you were proposing in your book seemed so achievable as far as a behavior, which was, how about if we just don't eat meat before dinner? That seems like a completely reasonable request. And then you lay out, here's why, and here's going to be the impact. So I don't know. That just struck me as that's a reasonable thing to request. I think so. I will go ahead. Sorry.
No, I think it's important. One good way to start a story is with empathy. You gave the example of mask wearing. I've thought about this a lot. I find it very frustrating that we haven't persuaded everyone to wear masks and get vaccinated. But I think a better starting point than, what are you, stupid, is I can understand where you're coming from. And I can. I can understand somebody who loves freedom so much that they are wary of any infringements on their freedom. I can even, if I squint my eyes and try really hard, find that beautiful and disagree with the conclusion of that line of thought, but revere the starting point. And I can certainly find plenty of sympathy for somebody who is reticent about getting vaccinated. I would try to persuade them, but I think my chances of persuading them are going to be radically increased if I start from the position of, I understand. I think I understand why you're reticent, and that's something I respect. Let's try to talk about it in a generative way rather than in a zero-sum game kind of way.
Yeah, and it also, the fact that you brought up empathy and kind of understanding where a person is, and that it's, for some, it's a freedom issue. You make that same argument when it comes to what we eat. You can see all this resistance of people saying, don't tell me what I can eat and what I can't eat. But what you're doing in your book, We Are the Weather, you're saying, right, but it's actually speeding up the end of the world if you keep exercising that freedom. Is that logic, that extension, is that going to get us there?
I don't know. I mean, another way of looking at it is we are already being told what to eat. We eat 180 times as much chicken as we did a century ago. It's not because we suddenly decided we love it and wanted to have it all the time. It's because of a really complex web of causes and effects and huge amounts of lobbying money and marketing money, the invention of new foods, A third of the meals Americans eat are eaten in automobiles. That also wasn't the case in the past. It's because we now have foods we can eat with the fingers of one hand, namely like chicken McNuggets are a good example. So, a good starting point is to question, well, what do we mean by freedom? Like, are we just assuming that everything we do in the present moment is by choice and not, at the very least, nudged by a lot of forces that are often invisible and rarely in our interest? So, if we can sort of like calm and quiet ourselves enough to say, this conversation makes me feel vulnerable, which the conversation about meat does for almost everybody, for a good reason, which is that we recognize that there's really high stakes involved, literally life and death on the most basic level. Can we quiet ourselves enough to say, this makes me vulnerable. I don't want to be accused of anything. I don't want to be made to feel like I'm a bad person, but I do want to have a sense of how the world that I live in actually works as opposed to how I have thought it works, and to figure out what role I can play in, as you said, participating in the future, a future that I want for my children and grandchildren.
So with that in mind, this has so many layers to it, because it's about human behavior, it's about choices and all that, but it's also about counting the cost of what we do and how we act and how we interact with one another. So our personal freedoms sometimes kind of butt up against the good for all. And that's one of the things you bring up, I think, so effectively in this book. But the content aside, let me ask you about the structure of this thing. I'm a big fan of John McPhee, and you've been at Princeton. You know John McPhee. He's all about structure, and so I was really looking at the structure of this thing, and you've got part history, part science, part personal anecdote, part inner dialogue with your own contradictions, which you've done this before in other kinds of writing. But I'm just wondering, from the writing perspective, do you chart that out ahead of time, or is that kind of how the outline reveals itself to you when you start this kind of a work? How does this work?
So I never chart anything out in advance of writing it, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. I used to. I mean, I still occasionally try to. And what I found is my ideas in the sense of premeditated, conscious, deliberate ideas, just aren't that great. And I'm not protesting too much, and I'm not making a joke. I really mean this, and I think it's an important thing to talk about, because I know a lot of other writers who feel the same way. Mm-hmm. I will not make the thing that I want to make on purpose. It's going to have to involve some amount of fortuity and accidents and engaging with my subconscious.
Yeah, discovery, right?
It's discovery. Yeah, being open, to what will happen. There's like a humility that's involved with writing. It's not the case, at least for the writers I know, and it's certainly not the case in my own experience, that I found some voice inside of me and it's just so worthwhile that I need to share it with everybody. It's more like, I don't know what's worthwhile inside of me, so I want to engage in a process that might reveal something to me. So, I've developed, this is a conversation for another conversation, but, I've developed practices for creating conditions that will encourage those kinds of happy accidents or associations. And oftentimes it is like following a path of intuitions without really knowing exactly where it's going. So I've done that in fiction, and I didn't know if I could do it in nonfiction, because the whole point of fiction, as I understand it, is to do something for its own sake without any necessary outcome. Whereas when writing nonfiction, there was an outcome I wanted. with this book. I knew what I wanted to write about, and I knew that I wanted to change people's minds and behaviors. So it would seem to be much more difficult to be open to a kind of intuitive process when there's really somewhere that you need to get to. But, there are an awful lot of paths to get to the same destination. And, I probably wrote 2 or 3 pages for every page that's actually in this book. Mm-hmm. This process that I'm talking about isn't efficient in a certain sense, but it's very efficient in a different sense. And that it really brought me to my actual concerns, as opposed to the concerns that I perform,
Yeah. Well, it's just so interesting, the distinction that you made, because you're right with nonfiction. My background is journalism, so I'm a nonfiction person when it comes to writing. But you're right. You start with a premise, and you build on the premise, and you support it, and you illustrate it, and all of that. So where is the discovery, process in that? But that's sort of my point, and that's why I thought this was such a fun book. Fun in the structure part, not necessarily fun in the topic part, but fun book to read, because you kept circling at it. It was like this gemstone that you turned it this way, and now let's let the light shine through it this way, and then you turned it this way, and it was just, instead of one long narrative, which would have been perfectly reasonable and justifiable, you take this other approach that just kept me engaged and kept me guessing as to how are you going to do this. And the discovery actually was twofold with me. Not only the content, but also I was really paying attention to your approach, and it was just really, really impressive. Loved it.
I mean, I think the form of the book follows the content, or is in the service of the content, because so much of the content is about storytelling. And why don't these stories reach us? And what would it take for the story of climate change to stick to us instead of just bouncing off of us? So the book plays that out, actually, in the writing of the book, where I was, writing for others, but also writing for myself. And does this stick? Does this stick? Is this going to finally reach me? I've read, even before this book, I'd read a fair number of books about climate change. And then in the process of doing the research for We Are the Weather, I read many, many. And so many of them, the great majority of them, are great books. And moving and eye-opening, terrifying, and ultimately forgetful. Or easy to forget, not forgetful, but easy to forget. And I don't know why. It's not because of the writing quality, and it's not because of the subject matter. It's something about, I guess, the intersection of the two. The way that the story of climate change is told doesn't reach most people. It reaches us in the sense that we know that we want to be on the good side. Maybe we want to attend a march, but it doesn't reach us in the sense of persuading us to do what needs to be done. Mm-hmm. So what would that kind of story look like? And I think it's not the case that I found anything or discovered anything with We Are the Weather, but the experiment is happening in real time.
Yeah, and you just told it in a more interesting way. And I thought it was really interesting the way you included being at the bedside of your grandmother during this time. So you had to think about, okay, this is serving a purpose here to keep coming back to her. She was this continuing thread, more so maybe, I think, than your own kids. When you think about the future, you think about your kids. You're writing about the future, but you're also connecting it to your grandmother. So what was the decision there?
Really, the decision was that I'm not going to try to keep my life out of this work of nonfiction. That ultimately, it's not an intellectual argument. It's a psychological and emotional argument. I think for most Americans, and I'm talking about old and young, Republican and Democrat, the story of climate change has actually reached our minds pretty well. 76% of Americans wanted the United States to stay in the Paris Climate Accords. That includes a majority of Republicans. And that's a pretty robust statement. It's not simply saying climate change is happening. It's saying that we need some aggressive policies in order to work against it. So, the story of climate change has reached most minds, but it has not penetrated most hearts. And I would say it hasn't penetrated the hearts of a lot of people who would seem to actively champion environmental causes. A much greater threat to the future than climate change deniers is people who accept the science of climate change but don't believe it. And I would include myself in that category.
Well, you make a distinction between climate science atheists or climate change atheists and climate change agnostics. So explain those two terms.
Well, an atheist would be somebody who refuses to believe that it's happening. An agnostic is more like somebody who knows but doesn't believe, who accepts the science, who attends the marches, who knows what to say knows the right thing to say in different situations, but doesn't make the changes that are necessary in their own lives. And again, I'm not better than anybody else with this.
No, I think that's most of us.
Yeah, I was on a plane. I flew on an international flight yesterday. I know what the effects of that are. I've been a committed vegetarian and very consistently so for I don't know, 3 years, but I've been a vegetarian for most of my life. Just the only distinction I'm making is that I've had these, moments where I'm not. A couple meals a year, but my eating behaviors have been inconsistent. They certainly could be better. My consuming is inconsistent and could be better. I live in a house that's too big. I drive a car too much. I am worse than most people. I'm not only no better, I'm worse, but I'm trying to wrestle with it.
Yeah.
And I think that it's worth being honest about how difficult that wrestling can be. It's very, very easy to buy a cool bumper sticker, to, do all the things that signify caring. And it's really hard to take the steps that we now know conclusively, uncontroversially, are necessary, which are basically, the 4 high impact activities for individuals are to fly as little as possible, to drive as little as possible, to control overpopulation, and to eat as few animal products as possible. Those 4 things matter vastly, vastly more than all of the other things that we do.
Sounds pretty simple.
Yes, but that doesn't help us. It does sound simple. In a way, it harms us because it makes it embarrassing when we fail, rather than inspiring when we achieve.
Yeah.
I had someone come up to me at a reading the other day. I say the other day, this was now 2 years ago, who said, hey, I read your book and I was really moved, and I've been a vegan for 2 weeks now, going strong. And I said, that's great. That's amazing. Just make sure you're setting yourself up for success and not failure.
Yeah.
Because somebody who goes from 0 to 60, a vegan for 2 weeks, that's 42 meals? Is that right? Did I get that right? Yeah, 42 meals. The first time that person eats an animal product, then they will have failed. The experiment will have failed, which is why you hear about so many fallen vegetarians. What they mean is I ate meat once and then I was fallen. The identity was undermined, so I just gave it up. As opposed to, hey, I learned about this stuff and I'm gonna try.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do my best. So that person, let's say they on their 43rd meal eats meat. Well, they would say, I'm batting 42 for 43. which like puts you in the Hall of Fame. You know,
Yeah, that's a good average.
An incredible achievement. An incredible achievement. And it's doing the same behaviors but telling the story in a different way.
Okay, so here's my last question, and maybe it's unfair to ask this as a last question, but I'm older than you, and I'm remembering in the 1970s, there was a report that came out called "The Limits to Growth," and it just said, at this rate, we're going to run out of oil. That was the big thing. We're going to run out of oil. And when that happens, you know, there's going to be revolution. There's going to be all of these awful things happen. And yet we figured it out. And so I'm just wondering, do you think that's one of the pieces in the agnosticism that people are saying, you know, smart people are on this. They're this climate change thing. They're going to figure it out. Do you think there's an element of non-behavior based on that?
I do. I think it's very lazy, and it's putting all of our faith in people like Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Which I'm not comfortable doing, not because I know anything about him. I really don't. I'm sure he's a nice guy, but he's running a business. And he is beholden to stockholders, and he wants to be the richest person in the world, or he's acting like he does. So his motivations don't perfectly line up with my desires to have a planet to leave to my children and grandchildren that can offer them something like what it offered me. So first we have to question who we're putting our faith in. Secondly, okay, if we're going to really push all our chips forward on that bet, why aren't we giving these scientists billions of dollars? You know, why aren't we? It's one thing to say, okay, we hope that somebody else will figure it out. It's another to give them the tools that are necessary to figure it out. And you hear very few people who resort to that line of thinking of, tech will figure it out. You almost never hear them talking about what we can do to speed up that process.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Well, to our viewers, listeners, I recommend this book. It's going to have an impact on you, and I think it's going to be an impact for the better. And Jonathan, thank you so much. After an international flight of burning all sorts of carbon, you've got to be tired, but it's great to be with you, and thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I want to mention booksellers. You can purchase this book, We Are the Weather, Saving the Planet Begins at Breakfast, from our independent bookseller partners. Support your indie bookstores, and you can find the link on the screen there. And we're also grateful for the support of the San Diego Council on Literacy. They are marvelous supporters of this Festival of Books and celebrate reading, and continue to join us on the full program of author panels, demonstrations, live entertainment streamed online for this festival. They're all going to be at sdfestivalofbooks.com. Thank you all for watching. Jonathan, thank you. I'm Dean Nelson. It's been a pleasure being with you, Jonathan. I learned a lot.
I would just echo the last thing you said about supporting indie bookstores.
Love it. Hit me.
It's analogous to exactly what we're talking about. Like, we have a choice to participate in the kind of future that we want to have and that we want to leave. Independent bookstores are, to my mind, as important as any institutions in our culture. And they survive only with our support. And it's undeniably easier to order something online, and it's almost always cheaper. But we pay a price for that cheapness, and it is worth walking those extra 5 or 10 blocks, and maybe even paying the extra $5 or $10, because the more bookstores we have in our future, the more likely our future is to be just, creative, and sustainable. So it is in every single way analogous to the argument about the choices we make with reference to climate change.
I love it. I love it. I was already a believer, but now I'm even more so. So thank you. It's been wonderful being with you today. Thanks so much.
You too. I appreciate it.
Hello, I'm Jose Cruz. I'm the CEO for the San Diego Council on Literacy. We work with a network of 29 youth, adult, and family literacy programs that annually serve 160,000 residents of all ages at no cost. Our mission is to unite the community to support literacy. It's an exciting year for us. It's our 35th anniversary. It's also the 5th anniversary of the San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books. The San Diego Council on Literacy is a beneficiary of this event. So when you participate, you support literacy, especially through the author panels and just in general. So when you participate in this event, you also make it possible for another person, a child or an adult, to improve their reading and writing skills so they can read the books that you read. We have our favorite event activities. We like the Storytime Hour, and you probably have your favorites too. So we hope that you'll join us at the San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books and learn more too about the work of the San Diego Council on Literacy by going to literacysandiego.org. Thank you.